Maybe the atheist can figure out why women love bondage. Who is forcing women to be in bondage sex videos? Some women love that lifestyle while you oppose it. This is just one of the many brilliant, beautiful, thoughtful, Holy Spirit-inspired Christian comments that I got on my recent video from last week, The Bible's Real View of Women, or God's Misogyny. In that video, I gave 13 crystal clear examples from the Bible itself, showing that women are not equal to men. Hell, they're barely equal to the animals that are also viewed as property around them. Despite being thorough and taking each story in context and also pointing out that there are indeed good examples of women in the Bible, but that does not erase a clear pattern of God and, in reality, his people hating these women. And yet still the comments came rolling in. So, 2 quick caveats, and we're diving right into the actual comments. First, we don't do this for the commenter. Some might be trolls or bots or real people. It doesn't matter. It is not to directly convince them. It is not because I'm butthurt or feel insulted. It is because comments like this, I know when someone is doubting or deconstructing, and they hear these good points, but then they check the comment section, and you have a bunch of Christians saying, no, that guy's dumb, he's out of context, don't listen. It can be what you want. You don't want that hard information to be true. You don't want to have to deal with it. And if that's the last word, sometimes that's not very beneficial. And so this is just me every once in a while, for some, not all videos, giving one more retort so you can close the loop on that and see just how ridiculous most Christian excuses truly are. And then second and last here, before we get to the comments, is just that this video is also a fundraiser. No pressure to give. Just by being here, the ad revenue gets generated higher, and I give all of that ad revenue. So you're helping just by watching, but please do leave a like, comment, share, watch to the end, click another video, do all the things that help. And if you want to give, you'll see a donate button off to your right or down below. I like to give this option in this series that I started called Giving Beyond Belief, because so many of us who left the faith still obviously have empathy and want to help others and want to alleviate suffering, but we're no longer giving our tithes or giving to all the Christian organizations that we were. So once a month, I'm going to give you some information. So at the end of this video, we will talk about Women for Women International. They are a secular group doing for women what this God clearly can't, as he does not exist and wouldn't even if he did. So I'll cover at the end of the video, but let's get back to this first comment. First, it's not lost on me that he is immediately talking about bondage sex videos, as Christians have on average, according to the data, the same if not higher porn use than their secular non-believing male counterparts. You don't know how disgusting this reads to me. It seems like some incel Christian who is glad to see the misogyny in the Bible and of course has no actual argument against it, instead wants to point to the thing that they think they have figured out, which is that all women must actually truly love to be subservient and in bondage, because look, some of them have this sex fantasy that is now acted out in the videos that this guy probably watches. And thus, what? All 13 examples I gave are fine. Rapist punishment is fine. A God sending a rape and abuse victim back to her abusers is fine. A daughter being sacrificed by her father because God helped him win a battle with a deal tied to it that was human sacrifice is just fine. It would be lost on you to sit here and talk about things like consent, as I can see that would not be your strong suit here, but that's a major difference in what an adult female chooses to do of her own volition versus being owned as property for life and used, your body used as nothing more than an object to deliver the only thing of value you can offer in this life. If you can't actually tell the difference between these two things, you are only proving exactly how corrupt, nasty, and immoral the thinking is of people that truly and fully buy in to these religions and their foundational parts, like that women are less than. A few comments. The Bible does not portray Tamar in a negative light. Maybe some twisted preachers are able to say bad things about Tamar, but the actual Bible does not. I'm so glad I have never attended the churches that you have attended. Also, in a roundabout way, Hagar has a happy ending. Since Ishmael and his sons are portrayed as socially equal to Isaac, that implies that Hagar and her family ended up being rich in the end. Okay, let's get to this. First of all, it does call Tamar a whore for being a prostitute. Now, it's from a neighbor, and Judah would actually go on to defend her as having more integrity than himself, but only once what? once she is carrying his child. Before that, he wanted to burn her for her sin of being a whore, which was acceptable to everyone in this circumstance, except again, once he found out it was going to be his child. That's not the win that you think it is. And also, it's not about the churches that I attended. It's about what the text says. And just because there's different kinds of churches that will take this text more seriously or less seriously, that will either excuse it because they have to or embrace it because they're being consistent, it's all wrong. There are worse ways to teach that story or show a twisted moral from it. I will give you that. But if you think it takes a church doing something incorrect to show that these verses in the Bible are not beneficial towards women, you have completely missed the point. And I would expect you to, if your next comment is something you think to be true, that Hagar actually has a happy ending, since Ishmael and his sons are portrayed as socially equal to Isaac. That implies that Hagar and her family end up rich in the end. No, it doesn't imply that. The Bible doesn't even imply that they're equal. In fact, it goes a long distance to do the opposite of that. In Genesis 17, Abraham pleads for Ishmael, but God says no, that the chosen one will be Isaac. We see this backed up in Genesis 21 as well, when Sarah is telling Abraham to cast out Ishmael. And God weighs in here and agrees, for it shall be done through Isaac. And even if it had a happy ending, after the abuse, the rape, the forced pregnancy, the sending her back to her abusers, that same God then allowing her to be cast out of the household because Sarah doesn't like it anymore, to essentially be left to die, which yes, God saves her, but we're supposed to what? At this point, give him a pat on the back and say, oh, all is well that ends well? Again, in a billion years, you would never excuse this for a human man, and yet when it comes to your perfect God, it's all of a sudden 100% acceptable? No way. Next. Mindshift just loves being proven wrong, doesn't he? Here's all the women that contradict what he claims. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these just to see. But regardless, if every single one of these women is held up by God as some shining vessel, how does it undo the 13 examples I gave? At best, if I can give my 13 and you can give your lesser number here, all we can say is that we have a God that is inconsistent, but sometimes is awful, right? That's the best you can say. You have a God that is contradicting, so maybe it's not as bad as it initially looks because there's some good. But if I tell you I have the world's best, purest, most perfect flower garden of all time, and you come over and there's 3 pretty flowers surrounded and being choked out by a dozen weeds, would you be like, hey, that's kind of a false claim about your garden? Like, yeah, I see the flowers, I see some pretty parts, but look, you have rodent issues, weed issues, your edges are falling away, you use the wrong soil. Like, you can take this analogy as far as you want. There's no excusing it if even one thing is wrong from its original claims. If you think your God is perfect and actually just and considers all of his creation to be actually equal, you can't have any examples, let alone 13 that were just jumping off examples of the many, 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 many more. But I don't think even all of your examples are as pretty as you think. So let's go through it. Mary, the mother of Jesus. You say this is a major one here. Well, I guess God didn't choose a man to give birth to Jesus. He used a woman, and you think that that somehow is a big deal because he used a woman. He used a woman for the only thing that women were good for in the society that he created by the rules and standards that he laid out, not that anyone forced upon him. The God of all creation asking a woman to volunteer is not just a power play, it would be akin to rape. Mary is passive here. Her body being a vessel that is used does absolutely nothing to undermine my claims of God's misogyny. If anything, they highlight it. Your next one is Judith, who slayed a major threat to Israel. Indeed, except not in the Protestant canon, so we're going to lose about half the listeners here because all of you Christians can't agree with each other about what's important. But Judith's character, regardless, is written much later than many of these other Old Testament characters. So you're getting some really nice Greek influence to help level things out that this previous tribal war god wasn't doing very well. And I've covered that book in its entirety, and it's not a perfect book, but yes, she is represented as somewhat more capable than most women, but only after she's done using her looks and the bait of sex to get herself in the position to do what needs to be done. Because again, even this is the same thing with the story of Esther, it still has to be sexualizing a woman to have her be giving value back. And again, not just because of the ancient past, but also because of what is clearly being represented and promoted within this religion. Now, Deborah, I'll give you. Deborah is the exception that proves the rule. But even she had to defer to male counterparts like Barak. And also hilarious that the one time we could agree on one comes straight from the book of Judges, which I had a few examples from Judges, and they got shot down by other comments because don't you know what that book is saying? That humans get it so wrong when God's not involved. And yet your two best examples in the Bible are Deborah, who gets in leadership when God is uninvolved, supposedly, and Esther, who's in the one book where God's not spoken about. How very, very, very telling. The woman with the alabaster jar, hilarious that you're given an example where we don't even get to know the name of this woman because it's so unimportant. She is praised for what? Her devotion. Did I make the case that the only way someone can be misogynistic is by always saying and doing horrific things to women? No, she is praised, but not for her leadership, not for her own mind or wit, for her devotion, her submission. Gosh, you're just serving it up on a silver platter. Then you mentioned Hagar, which just goes to show me you probably didn't watch the video at all. Maybe you looked at the timestamps and you missed Hagar, so you thought, I'll get him with that one because you also have a sick, twisted version that this turns out well for her. I covered Hagar. You would know it if you had watched it. You didn't. That's fine. Then you list Martha, who, what do we know about Martha? She is rebuked by Jesus himself for not being as what? Passive and attentive as Mary, just reinforcing that quiet devotion that is so preferable instead of what Martha was actually doing, which was actively contributing. And then I already mentioned Esther, but again, she's only needed because the first woman is killed for standing up for not just coming at the bequest of the king. And then Esther just becomes part of the king's harem and only can accomplish her goal by risking her life through the subservience of her body. Again, not quite the feminist manifesto here. And the woman with the 7 sons, again, not a Protestant book, so I'm going to lose some people here, but not the story you think it is either. Do you know what her story is celebrating? Martyrdom. Martyrdom specifically under male rule. Yeah, she has some courage that is listed, but she still has to conform to the patriarchal nature. And this is how I know you have to reach. Like when you try to make Mary an example, or now Moses' mother Jochebed an example. She heroically saves her baby's life through self-sacrifice. Wonderful. Again, she is shown as nothing more than the role of mother here. I'll notice you didn't say Miriam, who gets leprosy for disagreeing a little bit. Like for anything you think is a good example, which most actually only reinforce everything that I said, I can give you an opposite example that is 10 times worse that you have no excuse for except to say, close your eyes to that. Look at the pretty ones. Lest we forget, ancient Rome dismissed Christianity at first for being too feminine because of all the female believers. So what? Even if this were perfectly true, which I think there's cases to be made around it, it would say nothing of the validity of the religion, nor would it do anything to erase any of the examples or words or actions that we are supposed to believe happened from this God. But thanks for allowing me the chance to give all of these points. So Chris here comments quite a bit, and it's usually in better faith than many of the other Christians. However, I know that he doesn't believe in many of the things that other Christians would say they believe in. And so it's hard to respond to this, but it is a Christian comment and I did want to cover it. I'm a Christian and all I can say about most of these is that they are bad. I think the only thing I can say about any of them is that I have a suspicion some of them are supposed to be bad. Like Abraham and David are clearly presented as being scumbags a lot of the time, or really most of the time, as are most of the so-called heroes of the Bible, and that's part of the point the authors were trying to make. I like your final statement, expect better from your God. I feel like those are good words to live by. So again, appreciate you trying to agree here, but I do disagree with the biggest framework you have, that in most of these cases, the authors are trying to make the point about how this is bad. No, that is just factually untrue. I mean, the reason I made this entire David video, and I start it with the verse that declares David as perfectly just except for that one thing he did. So it lists out what David's sins are, and this is from God. And the only sin that he does in all of his days is to kill Bathsheba's husband. That's a murder of a man. That's bad. He is literally justified and glorified in every other action that we find despicable. And you can make the same case for Abraham. Show me where in the Bible Abraham is chastised for any of the horrific things that we talk about. He's praised for them. That was the point of this video. A man who's willing to kill his own son is the moral framework of faith, not the monster. Never is it said that he is bad for owning slaves, which we know he did according to the story, and that Hagar was one, or that he entered her and had a baby with her, and that his wife abused her. That's why God returns Hagar to that very situation. And again, I could do this with each example that I gave, but this is what's perfect to point out, because I believe this is the tension for the Christian. You either try to be charitable to the Bible by making excuses for it, like, oh, well, I don't really believe the Bible's inerrant, but anyways, the authors probably were trying to make a greater point, and we're not supposed to think these guys are good, except God tells you David's a man after God's own heart. Abraham was a friend of God. Like, no, they do get ringing endorsements, but you have to act like that wasn't the case, that they weren't being promoted, that they aren't the good guys, because you know what they did was wrong. Or you're the Christian that can't get yourself to say that. You do see the Bible as perfect and true. These are the moral patriarchs of your faith that you're supposed to look up to according to the text, and so then you have to go and try to make excuses for them, which, by the way, we haven't seen yet. We're a few comments in here, and so far it's just pointing a finger or pointing to some good example in the Bible, or now saying that the Bible never meant to represent these things as good. Except it did. But let's move on here. Our next one says, atheists are so audacious as to assert that they understand right and wrong better than God, but have no accomplishments that rival his to give credence to their position. This argument boils down to, I know there's no God because if God was real, he would obviously be like this. Laugh out loud. How would you know? Well, when I say I don't believe in the biblical God, I can know by comparing what the biblical God does and says versus the claims in those same books about what this biblical God is. All perfect, all knowing, all powerful, all loving. And then we see where he doesn't have full range of his power, where he's not omniscient, where he's not all good or all loving, equals falsifiable by God's own supposed objective morality. Since I would never be able to convince you that we all have subjective morality and that I'm using mine in the same way that you're using yours, you're just attaching yours to a God from an ancient book to have some grounding, where I'm basing it off things like empathy and self-interest. But which one of us is being consistent right now? Which one of us is having to make excuses for a clear abuser if they were real? And which one of us is still avoiding the actual issues put before the other? Because even if you're right and I have no ground to stand on morally, and atheists have no accomplishments that rival God's, everything an atheist has done is an accomplishment that rivals God's, because this God has never done anything. But even if you were right about everything, it doesn't change any of the 13 stories I brought up that are in your book. You can't excuse them, so you didn't. You tried to attack from another angle, and it's another failure, and it's still just more showing that you cannot deal with the actual issues in your religion. We get some helpful sarcasm here that says, we are so privileged to see someone who is smarter than God. You were there, were you? God's shocking misogyny, you ignorant halfwit. Wonderful defense for your God. Definitely convincing all the non-Christians out there that you have the truth. But I will meet you halfway and say I understand when Christians get offended, because the Christians who really believe in their God really believe that he is so much higher and better than man, because they believe they're losers who deserve hell. And so hearing me say that I actually disagree with this God, they're comparing me versus God, and so it's easy to say I lose. But that's not what I'm comparing. I don't believe in this God. I'm saying I know better now than the people who wrote these things down when they did. That is an acceptable thing to be confident in, and one you, the Christian commenter, feels about themselves for anything else. When you hear a Mormon claim or a Muslim claim that doesn't jive with what you believe you know, you have no problem saying that's not true? Would it be convincing to you at all if sarcastically some Mormon said, "Oh, aren't we so privileged to have someone know so much more? You were there then, were you?" See how it doesn't mean anything? And by the way, just so I understand the argument here, you're saying someone has to be there to actually witness these things for you to know they're true, yeah? Because if that's actually your consistent standing point here, you're in for a lot of headache yourself. This next one's pretty weak, but I bring it up for a reason. You should have given the book and verse and which version of the Bible you were talking about. Without those, the counter-argument is simple. The real Bible does not say those things. Again, this is what I mean. Had I provided the book and verse, which I usually do, right? On screen, I do it. I don't always have time to do that. It's a lot of extra editing work. Also, I assume you're all big boys and girls. And if I am talking about a story on Hagar and I mention Genesis multiple times, you can probably do a simple search that is the story of Hagar in Genesis and get chapter and verse, if you really cared. And that's my point. Even though you obviously could go and find out instantaneously that everything I said is 100% true and found in all versions of each Bible. There's no semantic word games I need to play because in every interpretation and translation, these horrible things happened. But you're already trying to set up for yourself that even if it was in the Bible, it's probably because I'm using a different and non-correct translation or interpretation of them. But I thought you just said they're not in the Bible. Don't you know? I do. I know when people make comments like this, which happen all the time, it's because you, as a Christian, sitting here supposedly defending your God, haven't even read the one book that you believe to be from your God. But I bet you've read Harry Potter 5 times, and then you have the audacity to come and tell me I'm wrong when you clearly couldn't watch the video or read your own Bible. Your comments are useless. And so I show this as an example of those people in the middle who are doubting and deconstructing why they don't need to listen to people at all that cannot actually contend with the issues themselves. This is another deflection, and it should be treated as such. Now, there were lots of comments like this, and I'm not showing them all because I think this is probably what they want. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that this is something Christians feel okay doing in the comment sections of these videos. But the Bible was right about women. Misogyny is in the Bible because it was necessary. The ignorance and sly cunning of women is dangerous to any society and any people. Literally every ancient society was misogynistic for good reasons. Now, I will say this comment could have been made by an atheist. We're not all good over here either. And on some of these, when I took the screenshot, I clicked and then I would see other comments and be like, oh, okay, they're Christian. So I'd like to tell you that this is probably from someone I checked, but I can't remember for sure. But either way, this was a viewpoint that came across quite a bit and has in many other videos where you're out of defenses. And so all you can do is say, yeah, deal with it. As if that's the moral victory. No thanks. Every single time you show that you believe the same horrendous, unfair, harmful, and unjust things that the writer of the books of the Bible believed thousands of years ago, you do nothing but prove my point for me. This one says, the day you truly listen to the voice of the Lord and not of men, preachers, it would shock you to understand how gentle, soft, caring, and above all, loving he is to women, and it's men, the ones that have used religion to manipulate, subdue, and control women. You and I are both agreeing. A lot of people commented this to me as if this wasn't my entire point. That, well, actually, it's the men who have these feelings and they're using God. Yeah, no, I agree. My point is the fact that they could, because that's how prevalent it was and how it was only a religion for these men to be able to use and wield power. And that's how it's still been put to use ever since and is still upheld as today. No matter how progressive you think you are, when you support Christianity and you say that anything in that Bible is true or good, you condone and help to support and stand up these ancient horrific ideas. And then you have these kinds of Christians that believe they know better than what people believed for hundreds or thousands of years, than what this God said and did himself supposedly. Now, the Bible was corrupt by men for their purposes, but that real God, which I'm still going to call Yahweh, and I'll still believe in his son Jesus, and I'll just pretend that that knowledge was obvious without the very text I'm denying when they no longer fit what I need them to be, and I've moved on and evolved this God in such a moral way in my head and through no other thing than my own psychology, then I've gotten to create the God of my dreams quite literally, and he's way nicer than what you're talking about, so you must be wrong, except I'm simply reading the words that are attributed to him, which hold a lot more weight than your fuzzy feelings that you've made despite those very words, not because of them. This one just says everyone is equal in Christ Jesus. That most definitely includes women. This is probably trying to use a verse, which of course they don't take the time to cite, that has nothing to do with women and men being equal. It has everything to do with they're both the same worth as a servant of Christ Jesus. It's about salvation, not who they are as individuals. Next, it says this is uninspiring. It's not really providing a better option for Christianity. For a guy calling out logical inconsistencies, there are certainly a lot of assumptions in this video. What are my assumptions? What are my assumptions that are incorrect? What are my assumptions that are inconsistent? Of course, you list none. And then also, I'm sorry, my criticism is not valid unless I can fix it. I'm not the one who broke it. And the first way to fix it would be to stop believing in it, which I know I'm helping people with. Now, whether I give them a life coach lesson plan for their next 90 days or their next 90 years has absolutely nothing to do with the validity of my initial case or issue. Is this all you can do, Christians? Is this the best you have? Scream context every once in a while, say you're a different kind of Christian and the Bible's not actually the perfect word of God, say that women deserve this, say that they actually like it, point out a few examples of women in the Bible that didn't have it as bad as the ones I listed, talk about how men also have it terrible from this God. Do you all see that so far you are all proving all of my points? But okay. The next one says you need a very good psychiatrist, but I'm afraid there is no hope for you anymore. Ah yeah, the believer of the all-powerful God who desires none should be lost, that goes back even for that one last lost sheep. But I'm a lost cause. Because you don't like me, because I say things about your God that would be true if he were real, that you can find yourself in the text that you've ignored or excused, and they're making you uncomfortable. But it's not my God, and I'm not the one who's hopeless. I'm not the one who believes in a false thing for a protection layer of comfort against the things I can't know and thus feel uncomfortable with. Also, just noting there's absolutely no argument in this one either. Next, it says, you people are such douchebags. Up until Christianity, women were treated pretty much like dirt. Christians are told to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. It's almost like I didn't address this, except I did. There are some pretty verses. Most of those New Testament verses are not actually as pretty as you think. Having a pecking order of man needs to fully submit to God and women need to fully submit to man only shows me that God likes a little separation between his hierarchy for when he has to interact with women, but that we're all below him, but that women are especially below him, and that they even need to be below man. That's not pretty. I'm really sick of this first world Christian privileged view of history. Not everyone everywhere hated women in the same way that your tribal warfare clan did, whose religion you have borrowed. And no, when Christianity came along, it didn't just fix everything either. And we have a lot of data to support that actually, that some of these things, these acts against women, happen more in Christian marriages than in non-Christian marriages. Or in secular marriages, because they don't have some holy book telling them they have a right to their wife's body no matter what, and that she is to be submissive, etc. Christianity did not fix anything between the role of men and women. And even if it had, this is still not an argument to anything I said. This one says, meh, if you want shocking misogyny, maybe look at what Darwin says about women in the name of science. Watch this, by the way. This is going to be really cool. This is something I think blows a lot of Christian minds. Are you ready? I think Darwin was wrong about that. See how freeing that is? He's not some moral authority. He's not claiming to be the God who designed everything and is giving limitations to half of his creatures. He's a man who held ideas and beliefs directly inspired by Christianity, which I thought the last commenter just told me fixed all of that. Oh, I guess not. That made his views part of his time and place, and it's not an excuse. They were wrong. Again, how cool. Say it with me, and then say it about your God, or the people who wrote the book you believe to be about your God. And also, no, not meh. The 13 stories I shared, again, if they are to be taken seriously as part of the history of this perfect, all-loving God, are not meh. They are inexcusable. But point to the one person you know tied to the thing evolution that you don't like and probably are undereducated about, show that he had a leftover Christian hang-up on his view of women and act like it's some kind of victory over the actual issues. Again, you have no real argument. You show how weak the Christian position is. Thank you. Now again, sometimes more of a good faith arguer here. I have JTF, the Christian and VTuber, and he gave a lot of points. I'm not going to cover all of them, but I did at least want to say there were some people who were trying to go claim by claim, and I wanted to show at least one of those claims as not to leave it out. But again, we can't make the entire video about all of them. So here at the 19-minute mark, he's saying it's almost as if David's a bad guy, except I handled this with one of the very first comments. David is not seen as a bad guy, not by the people who worshipped his lineage, nor by the Bible writers themselves, nor this God when the writers are speaking for him. So again, it just doesn't work. And then you say, nope, none of this was prescriptive except God bringing back Hagar, which you can see it as you won't survive on your own. It's better that you come back, even though it's not a good situation. God didn't give him the victory. God allowed the consequences of David's actions to come full circle. I feel like you're mixing up a few of my examples, but the easiest thing to say here, well, I guess there's a few real quick. No, of all 13 examples that I gave, there's not just one that is prescriptive. Many, many, many were prescriptive, and the ones that weren't, I called out and showed why it was accepted, condoned, or blessed by other things that still made it problematic. Also, isn't it amazing how little and weak these gods become when we need them to be? The one you agree is prescriptive, him sending Hagar back, is what he had to do as the best case scenario? Really? It's what God had to do? It's the only thing that could be better, is for her to go back to her abusive situation instead of for him to provide for her, which, by the way, another Christian will tell me that that's exactly why we should see Hagar as a good story, because after she's kicked out a second time, which God had no problem with. See, God didn't actually have a problem with her being out, stranded alone, and kicked out of the house. It was just about the timing of when Abraham and Sarah wanted it. But God provided for her then. Why not do it then? Because God's not concerned with her abuse. And I'm not going to take the time to go through and show where else this God is clearly prescriptive in many of the other examples that I gave, and I'd encourage you just to rewatch it or go read those stories for yourself. So that's it. I even waited a week to make this video, and that represents most of the Christian comments. There were plenty I didn't cover, but they were duplicate. It was the same thing saying, what about these people? Or no, women deserve it, they're horrible. Or what about that verse in the New Testament that says there's no such thing as male or female, slave or master? But there are, aren't there, according to Christianity? That's why Paul says, I don't permit women to teach. The same Paul that you say says there's no difference between men and women. Oh, well then why are there? Because the context of that verse is there's no difference when it comes to Christ's authority. It does nothing to eradicate slavery, nor does it do anything to make equal the sexes. So again, tons of duplicates, lots more Christian comments, but I tried to just cover the main arguments, and this was it. Again, like if there was a better argument, I missed it not on purpose. After a full week, it's pointing fingers or plugging ears. And I'd like to think the reason there's not more is because we've been effective with our other ones. Again, I will love to never make Christian comment videos when Christians stop commenting, because these videos aren't for you. They're for those doubting and deconstructing. But you guys like to hop in here and try to defend your God, so we're going to call it out. But okay, let's do this last thing in lightning speed. Would you consider giving to Women for Women International? Would you consider taking the money that you used to give to the church and putting it towards something that will actually help women, which is not going to be this God or this religion? Let me tell you about them and where your money would be going. Women for Women International offers women a 12-month program for rebuilding their lives, essentially. These women are survivors of war in general, conflict in general, the religions and traditions they were born to in general. And so there's business and vocation training. There's rights education, bringing them up to the moral standard that we've been able to improve upon despite the Bible and the other texts and religions like it. There's health and wellness training, and there's emotional and social support. Women are harmed all over this planet by men in positions of power often but not always utilizing religion as a way to assert that authority. But Women for Women International looks for long-term, real support for those affected. These women go on to start businesses, to support their families, and to educate others. This charity is good with its money, it is transparent, it is secular-based, and it has a wonderful global presence. It's in Nigeria, Iraq, Rwanda, Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, and so many more places where they are so needed. So I'm going to set a goal for $3,000 on this video. We have raised $22,000 so far amidst these other charities that we have worked together on. I appreciate your generosity, and if nothing else, you're just supportive. This video that will lead to others' generosity. So thank you for anything that you can do, again, to help this video shine. I'll see you Thursday for a Thinking Thursday episode on the concept of radical doubt or extreme skepticism. And until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, Shawn, and Steve; my Humanist heroes, Craig, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Matthew; my Atheist advocates, Aquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcom, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.